What's up, everybody? My name is Matt Kajeski. Welcome to the Stokastic DFS channel. Today, we're going to be talking some college football DFS ahead of the national championship. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. And if you're listening on podcast feed, please leave a rating and review over there. Subscribe as well. That helps us a ton. So thank you if you've done that. And we are brought to you today by No House Advantage. They recently just increased their first match to bonus to $100. You definitely need to check them out. And here's why. They have a couple of offerings for you, player prop varieties. The first kind you can play is against the house. Just like it sounds, that's where you're taking advantage of the listed player props, making lineups with them on No House Advantage. But they also have pick'em contests, which function more like tournaments, you versus other people, big prizes up to $25,000. And these are often overlaying, which means when they don't fail, they still have to pay out the same amount of prize money. So make sure to check out No House Advantage. Click the link in the video description below. Let's take you to our data tool, the highly anticipated national championship. Right now, we have TCU. They're about a 12.5 point, 13-point underdog. The total is 63. Going to be a really fun game overall. For DFS, we're going to start with the TCU side, try to talk some game theory and what to expect from these players. And we have to start everything kind of with Max Duggan. He's the quarterback for TCU, the most expensive player on the slate. He'll be leading this TCU offense that ranks 76th in pace, about a 45.5% pass rate. TCU has varied their pace a lot. We've seen them as high as top 30, as low as outside the top 100 when they're playing some of the easier opponents on their schedule. But I think with Georgia on the other side, it's probably a spot where TCU wants to play fast and maybe get Georgia in some situations they're not comfortable with. But Duggan, everything you could want in a DFS quarterback, 461 rush yards this year, averages 253 as a passer. That's on 28 attempts. And he's missed some games. Like, he did not start the year as the clear starter for this team. So some of these numbers are a bit depressed. The sample size has increased, so it's not drastic. But just know with Duggan, if you extrapolated this out for a full complement of snaps in every single game, it's probably a little bit more. With that said, you have TCU still implied for just 25 points. For reference, Georgia is at 38 points. So Duggan does not have the same expectation scoring-wise as some of the Georgia players, where you can play him at captain. It's going to hurt the rest of your lineup because of the salary, the expensive salary. I think Duggan makes for an awesome flex play due to the mobility, but for upside purposes, I'm not sure about him in the captain spot. You can definitely do it and make builds work with Duggan, especially with the mobility, the rushing touchdown equity he brings. But for me, we're going to look more in the flex with Duggan. And then we go to the running back position. There's a couple injury spots on this slate. One is running back. Kendry Miller left the most recent game, finished with 8 carries, 2 targets. He did leave in the first half, tried to return, touched the ball once, ultimately had to exit the game again. If you could guarantee full 100% Kendry Miller, I think he would be a nice pivot off of Duggan at this price. He is expensive. He averages 99.9 rushing yards per game as a receiver, where he's very involved as well. Another 9 yards. So Kendry Miller going to be used everywhere. And one thing TCU did throughout the year was consolidate their opportunity in close games. So you'll notice he only averaged 17.6 touches per game. Well, when those games were highly competitive, Kendry Miller saw 20-plus touches more times than not. Now, the injury here leaves a bunch of questions. One, does he play at all? If he doesn't play at all, we can look strongly at Amari DeMercado. If he plays, at what capacity is he out there? Is he at risk of re-injury? I think both of those are live, and for that reason, we should not be projecting Kendry Miller for his normal workload. I think something like 70%, with the rest going to Amari DeMercado, makes a lot of sense, which unfortunately kind of takes them both out of play outside of just your big GPPs. Really, as a 12.5 point underdog, nearly 2 touchdown underdog, we want one of these backs to receive all of the opportunity, but I'm not sure we're going to get it here. Both to me are GPP plays, and I'm not expecting any other backs to handle any work. Those names would be Amani Bailey, Trent Battle. I don't think we see much of them. Receiving game, they're healthy here. Quentin Johnson, he returned from his injury at what was called 100% now, and it looks like he is. 9 targets, had over 160 receiving yards against Michigan. He averages 82 yards per game, averages 7.3 targets. The target share is only 23%. He's explosive and he's dominant, and he's had a couple games with massive target shares, but those are actually few and far between. Now, the injury this year could have something to do with that, but Johnson actually has 2 games with double-digit targets. Pretty surprising, especially for a team that's running 4 wide most of the time. But ultimately, he's another expensive play on this team. I think he's a fine captain if you can get to him. But the target share is not quite as enticing as maybe some people think at first glance. So I'm worried about him maybe being a guy that comes in over-owned. He will play on the perimeter, and he will have a size advantage over the defenders he's running up against. The same can be said for Savion Williams at 7,200. He's been the wide receiver 2 in terms of routes for most of the year. But out of the 4 receivers we're really going to hone in on, he's been the least efficient. Just 28 yards per game, 3.1 targets. Don't see that changing drastically here. And one thing to note with this, he does have the second highest route rate on the year. But last week against Michigan, Tay Barber and Darius Davis, the 2 slot receivers, both eclipsed that in terms of route rate. Tay Barber actually worked a little bit ahead of Darius Davis. I think that makes sense. Darius Davis almost single-handedly lost TCU that game. Volleyball setting passes perfect passes from Max Duggan right into the hands of Michigan defenders. But ultimately, both these players are going to see around 65% of the routes. They're both running in the slot. They're both getting around 4 to 7 targets per game. Actually, on the year, you have Barber, who's been way more efficient than Davis, averaged 3.6 targets. Davis at 4.5. But for yardage, nearly 10 yards more per game for Barber, 4.3 to 33, 43 to 33 compared to Davis. Barber at a slightly cheaper price too. If you're not playing Johnston, I think Barber is the preferred receiver to get to in a vacuum. From there, 4 wide most of the time, but they do occasionally use a tight end. When they do, that's Jared Wiley. You're going to look at a route rate somewhere between 25 to 30% more than likely. You're going to see Jordan Hudson on the field. He's a receiver, but same deal. Probably 25 to 35% of the routes. He did have 3 targets in their most recent game, only 174 yards on the year. So we are talking very thin plays at this point. But if you need punts, these guys will be on the field a little bit. And from there, Blair Conwright, Jarquarius Spivey, those are 2 names to mention who will see a target here or there. Route rates for them could be anywhere from 5 to 15%. And I don't think we're likely to see anyone else on the field for TCU. Going to the Georgia side, 114th in pace, 47% pass rate. They really morphed to the defense they're facing. So we've seen Georgia they were above 50% pass rate for a lot of the season, and they've recently returned kind of to the Georgia we know and love a little bit more. But at the same time, if there's a weakness that they can exploit in TCU, if the coaching staff sees something, don't be surprised if Georgia comes out throwing. I know a lot of people are really honing in on the advantage they're going to have up front. TCU plays that 3-3 stack defense using 5 DBs most of the time. But Georgia is bigger up front. TCU does not have strong line yards. You look at their contact at the line of scrimmage or behind it, it's 95th in the country. Georgia is definitely going to have an advantage up front. But with all that said, I want to bring you back to the potential for them to throw. Stetson Bennett, he's 16,800 on DraftKings in the captain spot, cheaper than Max Duggan, which means I think we could potentially get some leverage here. He is mobile, 166 rush yards this year, averages 273 as a passer, which is higher than I think some people even realize, in 30 attempts per game. No, it's not in the Mississippi State category, but Stetson has pretty healthy volume here, and he has all year. And TCU will play fast at times. They will give up some plays on defense, especially. And I know they have good corners, but Bennett has all of the weapons in the world to exploit this. So as far as captains go, contrarian flex plays, I think Stetson Bennett should be near the top of your list. I do not think he's quite as owned as some of the TCU players. At running back, Kenny McIntosh, Dawan Edwards, and Kendall Milton were the only backs to receive snaps against Ohio State. They did not use Branson Robinson at all. He did not even play a snap. And Kenny McIntosh really dominated snaps. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this might be. One, Georgia has shown a willingness to consolidate volume in competitive games. Ohio State was the most competitive game they've played all year. And Kenny McIntosh is a pass-catching back. So they got down in that game early. Maybe that's why we saw Kenny McIntosh out-snap Dawan Edwards 37-15 and Kendall Milton 37-10. But I also think he is just the more talented player. And when they need their most talented players in the field, I think you probably do see more Kenny McIntosh than Edwards or Milton especially. So a couple of reasons why I think he's a great play here at 12,900. If this game is competitive, you're going to see a lot of him. In passing situations, you're going to see a lot of him, and that lends itself to DFS production, especially on a site like DraftKings. So for contrarian captains, especially if this plays to the game script of nearly 2 touchdown favorites, I think McIntosh makes a lot of sense. From there, Again, Edwards only played 15 snaps, but he's more their early down grinder back. Still had 8 carries. He touched the ball on essentially half of his snaps, which is key for him. Good, efficient runner, just not involved in the pass game is Dawan Edwards, but he's kind of at a weird price point. So if you do decide to captain him, I think he might give you a different roster construction. And then Kendall Milton still had 3 carries in the game, only 10 snaps, but we do need salary relief somewhere, and he's 4,500. He would be among the most contrarian of captains to look at. I don't think I'm going to get there, but for salary relief, I imagine he's probably going to be a popular play so we can jam in some studs at the top. I think all of the Georgia backs are fine due to that mismatch on the ground. Receiver and tight end. Georgia does have some injuries here, so I want to start there. Ladd McConkey has a knee sprain, played through it. Not well, negative receiving yards, 2 catches on 4 targets, and he had to leave the game early. He's going to play through this, but it's a Kendry Miller situation where I'm wondering at what capacity is Ladd McConkey out here. Don't think he's going to be played by the field, so maybe some leverage if he does gut through it. But I'm worried about the efficiency with McConkey, and he's so close to Bowers anyway, Brock Bowers, the stud tight end, that I think I'm just trying to find that 600 and get up to Bowers. Bowers on the season, 56 yards per game. That's on 5.4 targets per game. Like the running backs, they will use him more in competitive games. He's actually been above 90% of the routes, 5 straight games. That's key for Bowers here. And I think he should be healthier. There were some rumors that he was sick in the college football playoff semifinal, which means another week removed. Hopefully he's a bigger part of the game plan. Last week, he only had 1 carry and 5 targets. Generally in a game against, Ohio State where it comes down to the wire, essentially, you'd want Bowers in near double-digit targets, but those games are few and far between. I think in the most competitive game of the year, at least the game with the most on the line, the national championship, maybe we do see Bowers closer to 10 targets. And then at this price, he's just too cheap. From there, Darnell Washington did suffer an ankle sprain. He's their tight end too. Georgia's typically in 12 personnel most of the time. Was in a walking boot after the game, but some reporters got eyes on him when they traveled to the national championship. He came out of the plane, no boot on. All reports indicate he's going to play. He has about a 50% route rate. He's a cheaper play too. So similar to Milton, you're going to be looking at guys like Darnell Washington for value. But perhaps the most valuable player, price adjusted, could be A.D. Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell at 6K. Only has played 2 games since the start of the season. SEC championship route rate about 30%, 1 target. That jumped up to a 70% route rate and 6 targets in the semifinal. Some of that coincided with McConkey, but again, these are both boundary receivers. I don't think they're really cannibalizing each other very much. If anything, Ladd McConkey maybe gives some additional snaps to one of the other receivers we'll mention in a second here, but A.D. Mitchell, I think one of the best price-adjusted plays. He'll have a tough matchup. TCU has really good corners, so I think maybe they could blanket him. But with that said, price-adjusted volume, it's just too good to pass up with Mitchell. From there, we mentioned the top 2 tight ends. We mentioned the top 2 receivers. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint should be the 3. He's more of a boundary receiver. His role was essentially completely cannibalized by A.D. Mitchell. In the slot, you're going to have some rotation of Kyrus Jackson, Dylan Bell, and Arian Smith. Arian Smith was the big play machine in the semifinal. 3 targets. We know what he did on them, scoring that long touchdown. But he still barely played. I mean, we're talking route rates of no more than 30% all season long. And people may see the big game and think that that changed. It didn't. He still barely played. So there's still a lot of projection with Arian Smith. And if he does not catch that long touchdown in the semifinal, you're looking at a guy who's basically getting single-digit points for DFS. So I think he's very risky. Honestly, I'd rather play Kyrus Jackson, who continues to play more than him. Dylan Bell's a flyer. Dominic Blaylock's a flyer. Once you get beyond the Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaints, all of these players have route rates that are going to vary between 15 and 25%, probably not getting any higher than 30% without an injury to someone above them. And last thing to mention here, if Darnell Washington does miss, Oscar Delp would be the next man up at tight end. He essentially had a 50% snap rate immediately when we lost Darnell Washington last week. But that's just a what-if situation, and I don't expect we'll get there anyway. But that'll do it for the title game. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe on the way out. Thank you to No House Advantage. And if you'd like to reach out, I'm on Twitter at Matt_Kajeski. But this is the last DFS video for college. I hope you guys enjoyed it all season. I certainly did. Want to say thank you for supporting me, supporting the Stokastic family. And until next year, we'll see you guys later. Good luck.